Welcome to this afternoon's ILP Masterclass, and thank you for joining us. With the world of L&D changing so rapidly, it is so important that as learning professionals that we can continue to explore new techniques and methods so that we can stay on top of our game. So I'm really delighted that this afternoon we've got David and Kevin who are going to be sharing a collection of facilitation methods with us. So let's get on with it. Over to our host, Bill Gerard.
Thanks, Kerry, and welcome everyone. Got a small group at this stage, but hopefully we'll get a few more coming in as we go along. I'd just like to start by my usual way of acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that each of us sits on, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome everybody, and welcome particularly to Kevin Balm and David Jago. Kevin did a session for us, I think about near the end of 2019. With us here in Melbourne, and it was brilliant and very, very well received. And so we wanted to get him, and he has a wealth of experience with that, and he and David have worked together for quite a long time and things like that. So we're going to be talking about the technology of participation, which is Kevin, over to you guys.
Right.
Hey, Kevin.
Well, we thought we'd begin with a quick introduction to David and myself. So I'm going to take just a minute here. I got introduced or encountered the ToP, the Technology of Participation Facilitation Process, during my gap year. So this is going back to 1976. And it wasn't called the technology of participation at that time. It was called a consultation methodology. So I was a volunteer at a rural community development project in Western India. I was so deeply impacted by the first week, which was the use of this technology in the community of 1,100 people planning their future, that it altered the change in my enrolled university program and set me up to have the one job ever since then. Okay, so that's a little bit about my beginnings with ToP. Over to you, David.
So my timeline is similar, about 1980. One of the things that cemented my use of ToP as it became was a gig that I was given for QCOS, the spur of the moment, go out and do something with about 50 service providers on navigating government bureaucracy. So as I was driving out, I created a process in my mind and ran it sort of very emergently. And I got feedback afterwards from people that was like the best session they'd had for the whole weekend. And I thought, well, if that process does that type of thing for me, then it's going to work for other people as well. And so it's proved.
Thanks, David. Now we'd like to, and this is part of ToP or any good facilitation process, is about establishing the human system in the room. And so we want to take a couple of minutes with all of us to just do an introduction, firstly putting some information into chat, and then we can share that with each other. So the name, in acknowledgement, the First Nations country that you're presently located on, and then something new you learned recently. It could be practical, conceptual, relevant only to you, doesn't matter, but just something new that you learned recently, okay? So open up the chat box and type away for the next 30 or so seconds.
London in Canada.
Great, and I think that's all of us, right?
A few
Yeah,
more.
yeah,
Waiting on
fascinating.
Anne as well.
Good. Okay, so there's a
Aha. Thanks, Anne.
wonderful. All right, so well, there's a little bit of start, and if you haven't already met each other before in one of these master classes or meetups or the lounge, then there's something. We want to, our plan for this session is to spend about 45 minutes introducing some material on the technology of participation, doing an activity around it to ground and cement the underlying structure that we want to share. Spend some time reviewing that so we can, learn from that experience, and then end with 15-20 minutes of, Q&A, where we can pick up and do some deep dives into any of the material that you want, to take further. I want to say one thing about the technology before we get started. So it's about 60 odd years now. Okay, it started on a campus in Austin, Texas. It actually started with a student study group studying the theologians of their time, and wanted to develop methodology that would allow them in a depth kind of way engage with the theological writings of the theologians that they were studying at the time. And this method got born then. In its second phase, there was a group of about 6 couples who wanted to do a community development project on the west side of Chicago. And this was their foundational methodology that they took in there. But they set themselves an action research project alongside doing community development to also discover the methodologies that could be replicated. And after 7 years, they felt they had a substantial body of practice, methodology, knowledge, values, principles. Their next action research project was to test how this would work in other cultures. So they set themselves that, this strategy of, well, let's do one in every time zone around the world. That way we'll touch most of the world's cultures, and we'll learn quickly the cultural applicability of the methodologies that they had put together on the west side of Chicago. One of those time zones, of course, was India, and it happened to be my gap year, and I got invited, as a volunteer, and, as they say, the future was forever altered, at least for me. Okay? After the band of 24, as the projects were known, at least, even simultaneous to it, a lot of the funding for these 24 community development projects was coming out of the private sector. People who were called guardians, funders. A lot of them, as they saw this methodology work at a community level, said, hey, that could work in my company, my organization, my team, and began to invite this methodology into their workplaces. So we spent about 10 years shifting the context, finessing the methodologies for essentially private sector organizations, but also government agencies, departments, etc. And that took us into the 80s, and the group then took courage into their hands and said, we think we know enough now to document it in a book. So late 80s, a book was compiled the marketing people said, well, I'm afraid we can't call this consultation methods. We need a jazzier name for it. And we went away, thought about it, and came up with the phrase technology of participation. The word technology was our way of getting said that there's human technology that can be harnessed around which, or which could serve people in the conversations of significance to their present and their future. And of course, participation was because the methods were all about participation. And in those days, participation was the preferred word. Today, it might be engagement, co-creation, collaboration, etc. So that's a little, history on the technology of participation that we're wanting to share with you and have you experience, at least at a structural level. And then we can talk about how that structure becomes methodologies that can be infinitely adapted for various contexts, situations, issues, time of day, group size, you name it, any variable, the adaptability is possible. Okay, thanks, David. So I want to begin by just putting on the table, how we in ToP understand facilitation, not necessarily to be a definition of it, but what is our understanding of this practice that we call facilitation, co-creation, engagement, etc. For us, it's about influencing how people think and talk together. Central to ToP is to underpin the conversations that people are having, particularly conversations of significance to their present and their future. Okay. Secondly, thanks, David. So as a technology, it's made up of tools, and all of the tools are to ensure this conversation amongst the human system is one purposeful, that there's relevance of what's being talked about, and there's focus on only that for the duration of the session, and not trying to solve all of the world's problems at the same time. Meaningful. So this is a big thing about ToP, is pushing human people's conversation to the edges so they can push at the boundaries, discover new insights, new thinking about a old situation or a current situation. And then finally, productive conversations resulting in some output, whether that's a strategy, a decision, action, next steps, or even to say, we need to do some more talking, as a next step. Thanks, David. Just pushing this definition a little further, for us, facilitation process is about posing powerful questions and acknowledging that sometimes it's not just a question. It might be a question together with an instruction, together with information, with activities, etc. But designing and then orchestrating powerful questions in a deliberate sequence. And it is that sequence, that underlying structure, that we're going to be sharing with you today. Okay, but I want to do one more piece before we get to that. For us, and particularly ToP, it's about engaging people in wrestling with the questions, the information, the activity. But what's important is what kinds of people. It's not just those who know, but also those who do not know that they know, as well as those who are assumed not to know. And this is where we find groups we facilitate, people surprise themselves, or sometimes they surprise their colleagues, their managers, because they were assumed not to have certain information, insight, experience, and they're delighted that they've come through it. All right, so that's a quick one on that. I want to do one more piece, and then I'm going to hand to David. Over the years, as we've developed ToP, our own practice, observed others' practice, we've seen some distinct fields emerge, or should I say, aspects of the one field. And we want to start by, again, putting this on the table. For us, the largest, widest field that facilitation plays in is, one's stories, one's paradigms, one's narrative. And the one here could be an individual, a team, an organization, a social system. The scale can vary, okay? So facilitating as changing the operating paradigms or reframing the operating narratives, stories that people, teams, units, human systems are operating from. That's the biggest field. But, starting out at the left, we have observed that for some, facilitation is orchestrating play, so stimulating some activities that initiates interaction, that allows, one to experience their situation from a parallel perspective and then bring those learnings back into their situation. Enlarging that field a little bit beyond play, facilitation is carrying out procedures or a set of instructions, where a facilitator might use tools and techniques to enable the group to think, talk, plan, make decisions together. So there's some, concrete output that emerges. And enlarging that field even further, sometimes facilitation is about developing the process. And here we're referring to the process of thought that is occurring within an individual, amongst individuals, the field of engagement between people. And then, of course, that widest field, facilitating reframing changes in the operating narratives, which then influences, how people think, talk, what decisions they make, how they act on their decisions, and ultimately how they change or transform their situations. Okay? So that's a quick introduction to where ToP comes from. I'm going to ask David to take us very quickly through a program that we have constructed from which a lot of us ToP practitioners operate out of. Over to you, David.
Okay, so one of the things that's fun, from my perspective at least, around our facilitative leadership program is that we train facilitation using facilitation. And so it's experientially led, and then people go through and unpack that experience and figure out what's going on underneath. And then that also that also works at the flow of the overall program. So what we have, and using a bit of EET language, there are 4 skill sets involved, which are the main color blocks here, and 7 learning units. We always, in-house, we tend to call them modules and stuff. And originally, roughly 2 days of learning time per module in a face-to-face context. And so it varies a bit when you're doing online, offline, that type of thing. Okay, so starting at the base, the first module is around, what are the basic, the foundational facilitation methods. So a conversation method, a workshop method, and the underlying, what are the dynamics of facilitation that underpin the methods themselves. Okay, and then secondly, around just applying those to other tools, structures, frameworks that people already know. And so that fits under the general framework of facilitating productive interventions. So that's that kind of intervention scale. Then the second skill set, as it says, is around meaningful conversations, relationships. So starting to both push deeper and to strengthen, to empower the dialogue towards real change. And so the first part of that is strategic thinking and planning, and well, the next slide will come back and address these first three in a bit more detail. The fourth learning unit content is around working with diverse value structures and how to facilitate those in action. The fifth one borrows from the Harvard School of Negotiation and focuses on how you work with influencing a negotiation in a principled kind of way. Okay, as you can see, the next skill set is around, well, what does it mean to facilitate strategic change? So understanding and leading that and thinking around, what's the human diversity involved? What are the different human structures in play here, human and organisational structures? Then the last one is really, well, if I'm going to be doing this work with other people, what do I do for myself, with myself, so that I can do the best job that I can do for those people? So it's around self-mastery and the interior stances, the interior state of being that enables that work to go on. Okay, so that's all under the overall context again of a facilitated leadership program. Okay, so moving along. Okay, so then just to do a slightly deeper dive onto the first three units of the first three modules. And so, as I said, Unit 1, Module 1 is around foundational methods. Module 2 expands those and integrates those into tools or frameworks that people already know or may know, and then gives them the basis for continuing to do that for themselves in different ways. So it expands and integrates that original stuff and then starts to apply that in Module 3 to strategic thinking and planning. So, okay, so diving deeper. So we have so what we're doing today, we'll start to work with the underlying structure of this, the ORID structure, which then shows up in different ways. So one is, just your basic conversation method that helps people stay on track towards, as Kevin said, a productive and meaningful type of outcome. A consensus workshop method, and for all those people who've used sticky notes and affinity mapping and stuff, this is in that same field. And then there's an underlying process framework as well, which we cover here. Okay, in the middle we just have some the basic set of structures or frameworks that we use. So as you can see there, one's around for us as an organisation or a community, what's our history? Where have you been? Where might we go? And how might we start to move on that? So probably best not to spend too much time. We can talk about these offline, the other ones if you want, but the point is that applying the basic tools to different frameworks. And then so applying stuff to strategic thinking and planning. And so the difference here, from my perspective, is that the idea of starting with the end in mind around a practical vision is fairly commonplace. Oops. The joys of PowerPoint. Okay. And then saying, well, if that's where we want to be, what's blocking us? How do we get from here to there? That's fairly well known. And then, but how do you do that so that the group goes on that journey themselves, actually builds agreement, builds consensus as they go? So that's what this one covers. And then the last part in the overall structure around focused implementation, there's an action planning or breakthrough type of method that says, well, if we have a 2-year strategy, what is it that we do in the next 30, 60, 90 days to really launch that happening? as opposed to your standard Gantt chart project planning type of stuff. So that's the overall content of the first 3 modules.
So look, we kind of started with, ToP's worldview on facilitation, moved from there to how is ToP structured as a program, what are some of the methodologies that make up this collection of, technology of participation facilitation methods. And what we want to now do is a deep dive into one of 3 meta frameworks that underlie ToP. So we've talked about particularly the thinking framework that we want to share with you now. Okay. And so on this next slide, and I'm going to just talk you through the slide as it appears in its entirety rather than, stepping you through it. So introducing you now to one of the foundational meta structures underlying the technology of participation methods. And in many ways, it is the meta structure to ToP. It is this structure that was pioneered on that student campus in Austin, Texas, in the 50s and early 60s. This meta structure is based on levels of human existence theory, perhaps best understood as the Socratic method, where we not only observe or experience life, but dig deep into those experiences and name what we discover there. And having done so, then live out of those narratives. You might remember that famous line from Socrates, the life unexplored isn't worth living. And his big thing was about digging into the encounters we have in life, discovering what's there, naming it, and then going on to live out of that new narrative that you created. Okay? And that, in essence, is the basis of this meta structure. Okay? The premise of this meta ToP structure is that awareness of our experience of a particular situation is initiated at a sensory level. We absorb and begin interacting with the situation we find ourselves in through our senses. For example, we take note of that situation sort of factually, observationally, much like a recording of this session will capture, what you're seeing, hearing, and not just the content of the slides or the sound of my voice or the content of my voice, but the other people, all of the different aspects of this encounter that we are sharing together, in this moment. In ToP, we call this the objective level. So one other thing to say here before I go to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th level. This particular meta structure also comes from the school of phenomenology, which says we observe and then name what we're observing. So the phenomenological method was one of the early names given, to this meta process or this meta structure. So that's the first level of this meta structure. Okay. The 2nd level, where we then proceed to the associative level. So psychology would talk about the 2nd level as the associative level, where awareness of a first or a surface level relationship to that which we're encountering, to the situation that we're in, starts to emerge, or that relationship starts to show itself. Typically in the form of feelings, emotions, associations, memories. Hence that phrase, first level relationship. It's that gut reaction to the facts and data of the objective aspects of my situation. Okay. For example, we're aware of either liking, disliking, enjoying, feeling confused by what we're seeing and hearing. It's possible that some of you at this moment are looking at this slide and saying, too busy. There's the associative level kicking in, being initiated. or some of you might say, I like the colorfulness. There's an example of the associative level playing itself out in real time. So ToP calls this the reflective level. And for historical purposes, we continue to use the language that was first constructed, back in the late 50s, early 60s. So we continue to say objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional, even though today we might have some more contemporary language, for these categories. Now, moving on to the third level, when we dig into the whys and wherefores of our feelings and associations, our awareness moves to a deeper relationship to the situation that we find ourselves in, okay? And now this deeper relationship is not just to the objective level, but it's also to how we are reacting to the experience that we're having. Where we make sense of and make meaning out of our experiences. So here's where questions like, now, why am I feeling anxious? Or why is he sounding angry? Or why is he so excited when I'm, unsure? So we're trying to make sense of all the different reactions, our own included, to the same shared data, the same shared situation. What we're doing here is we're attaching meaning, we're attaching importance, attaching significance, attaching value. And when you think about that, when humans start to do that, the reference point is our own values, beliefs, worldviews, assumptions, etc. So the interaction here is at this deeper relationship, not just, the gut level. Now, ToP calls this the interpretive level or the integrative level, where we are integrating the data, our reaction to it, and trying to make sense of what is occurring. Finally, based on the meaning making that we've engaged in the third level, we move toward a resolution or a conclusion about that situation. We're attempting to bring closure in the form of a conclusion, or converge on, so what are we going to do now that we've made sense of what is occurring? What's our decision? What's our resolve? What's our next step? Or what's our first action? Those are the kinds of questions that get formed, asked, and answered back there. Now, and so this can take the form of a decision, action, next steps. Sometimes the conclusion is to say, we don't as yet know enough. So we need to go canvas, more information, more feeling. We need to dig deeper, in order to generate some greater or deeper meaning, understanding, before we're ready to say what we will do about it. So sometimes you loop back in this process in order to go deeper before you then fall out into making a decision, okay? ToP calls this the decisional level, okay? The acronym ORID is often used. So O for objective, R for reflective, I for interpretive, D for decisional. And, I'm bold enough, and a lot of us in ToP are bold enough to say, all life is ultimately an ORID, and sometimes it's a horrid ORID. So you can be in a really messy situation, where it feels horrible, but ultimately you're working your way through this. Now, this doesn't mean that our awareness always starts at the left and neatly and sequentially moves from left to right. No, it may start anywhere in there. I work with some clients who start at the eye level. They're already making sense, and I have to pull them back to say, now, what's the data on which you're doing that sense making, and is that data shared by everyone? Or some that might start at the reflective level and they say, I don't think this proposal will work. And I say, again, what's the data upon which you're making that assertion, and is that shared by everyone else in the conversation? And that's one of the assumptions we make, that we're all having the same equal access to all aspects of the situation we share, and therefore, we can get on with this. I want to just say one more thing about this, and then we'll start to, to work with it. Okay. Like all things human, socialization creates preferences, and what otherwise would be an efficient and effective process or structure becomes dysfunctional. So one of the things I often find as I'm beginning to facilitate, some of the participant group might be at the data level, the objective level, while simultaneously someone else is at the interpretive, while simultaneously someone else is at the reflective, and a manager or whoever might be at the decisional, just wants to get the decision made and go implement it. And so working to bring everyone onto the same platform and then systematically and sequentially journeying the conversation all together towards a decision that would encompass all of what we know and what is known to everyone, and all of the reactions to what is known, and all of the meaning making that has been made, and then asking the question of, so now how do we act? Okay. Finally, I just want to say that for us in ToP, recovering and reclaiming this inherently natural structure is embedded in all ToP facilitation methods. So in that slide where you saw 9, 10 different methodologies that make up ToP, every one of them at their core, at their foundation, is activating this 4-level sequence of awareness or overlaying it on our situations. Whether that situation is about developing a community development strategy, or how to more effectively work as a team, or how to improve the quality of our customer service, or how to make our processes more transparent and less repetitive, etc. Whatever the topic of conversation, every ToP methodology overlays this meta process, on that conversation, together with a couple of other meta processes. Okay? Now, I want to just pause there. What we have planned is a little activity to ground this. So what I've done is to talk you through the conceptual framework, if you will, and then we want to use an activity to help that settle practically for us. Not conceptually, but experientially. And so we've got one in Jamboard that we're going to take you through, and then come back and and engage together in a conversation about why this, why not this way, what happens if, start to overlay our experience and our questions on this. Okay. All right, David, our next slide, we'll introduce the activity and then come back to this.
Okay, just before we do,
Yeah.
Cynthia's just put into the chat about, can you just clarify the contemporary terms for each stage? So you might want to do that now, or take that on notice for the Q&A at the end.
Let's go, one step, Cynthia, and by the way, hello, this is a blast from the past for me. Yeah. So situation, association, integration, and then, decisional could be convergence, conclusion. Meaning making. I remember reading about 10 or so years ago in one of a Harvard article that one of the new leadership competencies was, making meaning for teams, making meaning for people. So there's the integrative, the meaning making level. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay.
All righty.
So let's just set up this activity. All right, David, you're going to set it up while I put a few things into that. Yeah.
All right. So a number of pages, all the same in Google Jamboard, and you'll be working in small groups of 2 or 3 or 4, and the task is to organize the cards. Okay, my internet connection is unstable. I might say that again. So you'll be working in small groups, and of 2 or 3 people per group. If you're in group 1, you get to go to page 1, group 2 to page 2, and so on. What you have on each page is a string of cards along the top, a string of cards along the bottom, and just a recap of the ORID sequence. Okay, so your task is to arrange the cards in one string according to what level is being activated or being called out by the questions on the top. The row along the bottom is a set of statements. So again, the same task to reorder those into the correct sequence of statements, based on the run through that Kevin gave you on the ORID. The timing in your small group is 12 to 15 minutes. If you don't know the other person or persons in your small group, you may choose to spend a minute just introducing yourselves. That's so you got a better sense of who you are and yourself as a group. Let's see now, the link to the Jamboard will be going into the Zoom chat box.
It is there now.
Okay, so Kevin's put that. Okay, so we've only got 5 people currently with us, so we'll maybe have just 2 rooms. Okay, so a group of 2 and a group of 3.
Just 2 rooms. Okay, let me recreate those because I was going to do 3, but let me recreate into 2 then. Okay, let's recreate to 2. Good. Okay. All right, and so please open the link won't be there once we go into Zoom rooms. So open Jamboard now, and then you can work out which page depending on which room you get sent into, room 1 or 2. Okay, I'll open rooms, David.
So, yeah, can we just if people.
Oops, sorry, David. It Zoom sent us into rooms.
Back to you, Kevin. David?
David, actually, yeah.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. What I thought we could do is just spend a couple of minutes on page 1 of Jamboard and then page 2 of Jamboard, just to see where we all got to and to check it out. So if people can firstly just go back into the link for Jamboard if you've left, and then go to page 1, please.
Got it.
On there now.
Well, the bottom is a mirror image.
Just check everyone's there now. Can see.
Gee, that's a good looking Jamboard.
Everyone can see page 1.
That's true.
Isn't it, Neil? It's
Alrighty.
great. It's a great Jamboard. Top notch.
Neil, you didn't do like our students, mate, and wait till everyone else finished and then copy it.
We wouldn't allow that to happen. Alrighty. So interestingly, the question often is around here, well, is that the right sequence? There's several answers to this. One is sometimes you can say yes, and sometimes you can say, well, it depends on the context, and then responding in the moment to how the group is going and stuff. But I noticed in both groups, they had the same sequence in the bottom row about the statements. So the situation of a team lead providing feedback to a team member. And so from the sequence that Kevin and I designed, both groups got them the same and the same as us. So clearly the right answer. No, sorry. And bear with me if I pause every so often, a bit too long. It's just that I've been habituated to pause for translation. So you just have to kind of give me a prod and say, David, we're all English speakers here. You can get on with it. Don't worry about it. And so on. One of the other things that I noticed was that both groups had the same question at the end around what will you need to include before, during, and after. And I can report that that's the same in the sequence that Kevin and I had. And so I'd just be interested to know for Neil and Cynthia, what was your thinking around putting that one there?
Which one, where are
if you respond, you're on mute at the moment. So the last question around what we need to include before, during, and after. What was your thinking around why that one went there?
It was because we were thinking about the discussion and making meaning of what we'd heard about what the factors were. So it wasn't an emotional response. And you weren't, I mean, you were kind of potentially making a decision about the factors, but yeah, I thought it was more an interpretation. I think we initially had it at the D, but then I moved it, Neil.
Yeah, we reached the consensus. It started off at a D and then ended up halfway to an I.
Yeah, an ID. One of those bridging ones.
And are you going to tell us we're wrong, David?
You're so polite. You're so polite, David.
When you put it at the end, when you put it at the end, and the same for Brett and Berenice, that is the last question, and it is an action question. You know, what will you need to do? What will you need to include? And so it's an action question asking, what will you do next? So it's a decisional question.
Contribute to sticky learning transfer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If you're looking at that one,
yeah.
Then yeah, that's
because that's an
it's asking you to consider, to interpret, to analyze.
Yeah. Well,
makes sense.
When you know why,
the result of that.
Yeah. When you know why, you can decide what to do, and then you decide how to do it.
The observation I would make is, you know, in this environment, we have this laid out in real life, in our real conversations. We don't have 4 stages to the conversation. You know, there's a continuous flow. So the question then becomes, have we got the sequence right? So that we're not, you know, we're not activating a jarring, jumping from one level to the other. And I would say, looking at those last 2 questions, the sequence amongst those last 2 is right.
Okay. Again, conscious of the time.
Yeah. Look, I'm curious,
Okay,
David, to
so
ask
group
this
2
team.
had the same sequence at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, group 2 had the same. Yeah.
Were you going to ask a question, Kevin?
Yes, for both groups, You know, the question, what first comes to mind when you hear learning transfer? Both groups have placed it under the reflective category. And my question would be, so what's the clue to you that a question framed like that is more likely than not to throw up emotions, associations, feelings, etc.?
To me, when it first comes to mind, I'm thinking back as to what my experiences and everything have been to use going forward. So therefore, I'm reflecting on what's happened in the past.
Okay.
And
so
I
in
was
this-
thinking,
yeah.
I was thinking that yeah, it's sort of like, it's actually what first comes to mind. So, which is sort of maybe more the I, but for me, what first comes to mind always is, even though it's mind, it's still my heart. It's still like so when I first thought about my answer to that question, it would have been, it was boring. It was really exciting. I found it really interesting. I loved it. Yeah, so it would be kind of more feelings, words. But then I'm a feeler as well. It
So,
wouldn't be objective or
data, yeah.
Yeah.
So a good observation, you know, we can frame questions one way, but the listener hears the questions in their way. So here's my follow-up question to both teams then. So when you look at the first three questions, is that sequence, never mind which category, is that sequence the right sequence so that the conversation doesn't jar? Now it has a nice, steady cadence about it. An example of a learning event you've planned for in the past, then an example of a learning transfer you've participated in as a learner, followed up by what first comes to mind when you hear the phrase learning transfer. Is that the sequence, or would you alter the sequence of the first three?
I would move the third one to the first place.
And say a little about why, Bernice?
Well, it's kind of like an introductory question rather than a deep dive.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably also the opportunity to make sure the group all has a common shared understanding of what learning transfer actually means, so that we're all starting the conversation from the same shared definition or of what it actually is. Yeah.
So you see how it can work both ways, right? It can stay where it is, but it can also start out the conversation to just get top of mind. As Cynthia rightly says, it's to not assume everyone has the same take on this phrase, concept, learning transfer, but to put it out there and then go from there. Okay? So the question becomes not, do I have the right category, but do I have my questions, my statements in the right sequence, so I can, in a systematic way, activate the surfacing of information, followed by the surfacing of feelings, followed by the surfacing of meaning making, and then converging in decision making. That's the essence of the meta structure.
So from what you're saying, then the first one we've got there, where you giving an example of a learning event you've planned for, that really should be the third one, because you first participate, and then you would move to being the organizer.
Okay. Look, I'll just move it for the purpose of the conversation and time.
Yeah.
And so the point here is we're using three questions to try and get as much data on the table, as much that is known and experienced by the people in the conversation, so that we have a solid platform before we go on to exploring that first level relationship, which is emotions, then the second level relationship, which is meanings, finally converging. Yeah.
So in the now third question, you've got a learning event, which in my head is separate to learning transfer.
Yeah. So you would kind of move it this way, right? Is what I'm hearing you say. You do an event and then you do that.
Yeah.
Look, and again, there's no absolute right answer. No, it's about, okay, I want to keep the cadence, I want to keep the flow, I don't want it to jar, I want to keep people on this journey together. You know, I'm corralling the conversation so that we can move forward together. And I can see, look, I can't tell you how many times I thought I had the sequence right, and then I go do it and I realize, oops, my third should have been the second, or first should have been second. And anyway, fine. We gotta just check in here. Bill, we're about 10 minutes to the hour.
We've got about 10 minutes left overall.
Do you want to take another 5 minutes on the second board?
Yeah, it's okay. Let's go to page 2, but I think we were kind of working it through.
Yeah, if you need to make any changes, but yeah, have another 5 minutes if you need it.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah.
I think what we were talking about, I'm thinking of different examples now of the situation. So I'm actually thinking, well, what would be the answer to this question in this situation? And that's why I'm now changing the orders.
Yeah. And look, Brett, that was a great hint. You know, we don't want to ask questions that we don't first try out on ourselves. Yeah. And that trying out tells us, oh, that's data. You know, I may have thought I'm going to get feelings, but it's actually throwing up data. So either I rephrase the question or I leave it as a data question.
And also trying it out in context. So the different questions will get different responses according to the group that you're actually leading, wrangling through the conversation. Okay, there's a question in the chat as well. Just an opportunity to ask a random question about having a conversation with people when values aren't shared. I mean,
Bill, is that a no from you? Is that a no?
No, it's not a no. I'm just thinking that my sense is we're actually just about finished our review of the Jamboard exercise.
Is that what you meant by the question, Cynthia?
Yeah, I was intrigued when you put up in your model at the beginning about having conversations about diverse values, and it's something I'm really grappling with at the moment, and I just thought I'll see if there's an opportunity to mine the wisdom of Kevin and David about this. Yeah, but only if it serves the group.
I think this structure, Cynthia, and I've always believed this, you know, is a terrific way to have conversations where values are not shared, but the situation is shared. You know? And because the values don't come into play till the third level, I have the first 2 levels to create a deeper understanding of the situation we share. You know? For example, if someone is upset, by being able to connect their upsetness with data, I better understand that individual. So I'm no longer saying, oh, he's just always angry. You know, I now have a context for that person being upset, and it starts to shift how I'm seeing this person, and therefore where values were not shared start to come into some degree of sharing.
Yeah, I'm on a panel, and it's a women's panel, and we're talking about what's been happening recently in federal parliament, and it just seems like, from my point where I'm coming from is that there's like all of the stuff that's been going on in federal parliament. Some women really get it and feel part of, you know, sexism in the workplace, but then there's some men and women who just fundamentally do not understand the experience. And so and there's some women I'm working with who have been saying we can't even have a conversation about it because we don't want to alienate some women who don't share this experience, and we don't want to leave men, we don't want to be sort of criticizing men. And I've just been like, how do we even navigate that when people just don't seem to get each other's points of view? Because I don't get that point of view. And I'm really struggling with how do we navigate that? So I know that won't be relevant to everyone at all, but it's just like, because it's a contemporary issue and it's so polarizing, it's like, as a facilitator, how would you even approach it?
Sounds to me, Cynthia, like you want some time with Kevin after this.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Only if it, yeah, I just thought if there was time and it
Be well worth it. But listen, we are running out of time. Kevin, do you have a 1-minute response to that at this stage?
Yes, certainly. Look, and Cynthia, while your example was specific, I think all of us would share similar situations. And for me, it's a clue that I've got to spend a lot of time in the O and the R before I venture into the I. So say to people, you know, hold off. Let's stand together in all of the dimensions of our shared situation, our shared experience, before we allow the differences in values to surface. Because chances are it can change the meaning I'm attaching, because I'm now standing in a much wider data pool than before. So in a way, you're forcing people to observe others' experience of the same situation, you know, as uncomfortable as that might be.
Yeah.
Sometimes we jump
The
too
only thing I'd
fast
add,
through the O and the R.
And also because it's we're talking about people, Peter Block's thinking around connection before content. So first, take the time to build the connections with the individuals themselves, and then the group as itself, before you even have the conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of, Bill, I'll just take 30 seconds. Shorthand, before we named this technology of participation, it was observe, weigh up, judge, decide, and act. That was the 4 stages, okay? And the reason we use that language, observe, weigh up, judge, decide, and act. If we judge early, we are sunk. Our conversations are sunk. They get stuck and are more difficult to come back and redo them, you know? So we don't want the judgment to come in early. We want to do the observation and the weighing up and, you know, stay with it before we go into the judgment. Okay,
right.
sorry, but back to you.
No,
Thank you. That's terrific. Thanks so much, David and Kevin.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for the participation. I thought it was terrific, and the way Jamboard was being used was quite interesting to watch and be part of, and things like that. So thank you, Kevin, and thank you, David, for sharing with us, I guess, some really what I see as some deep participation skills and really deep facilitation processes and things like that, which I think, you know, we need to continue to develop on and things like that. So just in this last 2 minutes, I just want to tell you a little bit about, first of all, Carrie's had some emergency things that she's been sitting on the phone and doing a range of other things with. So she's been in and out as much as she could, but she apologizes for not being able to spend more time with you today. Just to finish off for today, a reminder of some things we've got coming up. If you've ever been to one of our L&D lounges, we're back on Friday mornings at 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock to connect with people that will come along and join into that are, you know, generally really love it. It's like a little tribe community, which has been great. And we've been talking a lot about tribes recently. We had a meetup here in Melbourne last night. with a bunch of people getting together, sometimes actually meeting for the very first time, even though we've been talking to each other for more than a year. So that's been a lot of fun. The other thing is we're looking at the next masterclass, which is going to be on a slightly different time. It's going to be on a Thursday this week because the facilitator we have, Luke Chalanor, is just tied up with so much stuff on family stuff on the Wednesdays. So the next masterclass is on the 10th of June, and we'll be putting information up on that in the next day or so, 10th of June. And Luke's organization is called Corporate Engagement. And what he's going to be looking at is something new that he's been working on called 5-way thinking. And what it's really about is to sit back and look at the help of organizations to step back and see the bigger picture of their organization. They have a view that a lot of us only focus on 1 or 2 business areas, but step back and see the bigger picture in order to understand your clients' needs in order to maybe address them better. So this is it's a corporate engagement kind of thing, and taken from a new way of thinking about things. So it's going to look at strategic alignment, customer insights, market intelligence, operational understanding, and financial awareness. So this is a real, what I would call one of our build your business themed masterclasses, whereas say today's was more around, build your offering and grow your offering. So come along to that. And again, just a quick one, you can register for those on the IOP website. And if you register for the L&D Lounge, just a quick one, register the first time and then get that link, and it's the same link then every week. So you could put it as a recurring calendar invite and just have that same link every week. So that's where we're coming from. So 5 o'clock, right on the nose. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and attending. Fantastic to see you. And looking forward to catching up, hopefully at some meetups as well, but always on the master classes. So have a good evening.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill.